Cold air sliced through the street like an invisible blade, and the boy's breath came out in short white clouds as he tightened his fingers inside sleeves that were already too thin for December. He stood at the edge of the bus stop, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the road as if hoping something warm might suddenly appear between passing headlights. The city around him kept moving, engines humming, shoes clicking on concrete, lives continuing without pause, while he stayed still, small against the vastness of it all, carrying a sentence in his chest that felt heavier than his body could hold. Santa missed our street. It wasn't said out loud, not yet, but it lived in his eyes, trembling there like frost on glass, waiting for someone to notice. If you had been walking past that bus stop in downtown Cleveland that night, would you have slowed your steps, or would you have pulled your coat tighter and told yourself you were late? Would you have seen just another family waiting for a ride? Or would something in that child's posture have reached into you and asked you to choose between comfort and conscience? That was the quiet test unfolding under the dim streetlights, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that decides who we are when no one is watching. The boy's name was Lucas, 7 years old, with hair cut too short by someone who had done their best with dull scissors. His sneakers had lost their grip long before winter arrived, and his jacket, a hand-me-down several sizes off, had a broken zipper he held together with one fist. Beside him stood his mother, Rebecca, her arm instinctively curved around his shoulders, her spine straight in the way people stand when they are determined not to fall apart in public. She wore a simple blue dress that had once been meant for work, now layered awkwardly with a thin cardigan, her face pale from more than just the cold. She kept her eyes on the digital bus schedule, not because it mattered so much, but because it gave her something solid to look at, something that didn't ask questions. Across from them, slightly apart, stood a man whose presence felt out of place in that moment, like a polished coin dropped into the gutter. His name was Andrew Whitmore, though no one there knew it yet. His coat was tailored, dark and expensive, the kind that held warmth without bulk. His shoes were clean, his watch subtle but unmistakably valuable. He had arrived at the bus stop moments earlier after his driver called in sick, an inconvenience that annoyed him more than he cared to admit. Andrew was a man who scheduled his life down to the minute, who believed that control was the same as security, and who had not ridden a public bus in over 20 years. As the minutes passed, the cold grew sharper, and Lucas shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His gaze drifted to Andrew, lingering there longer than politeness would normally allow. There was something about the man's calm, his warmth, that made the boy curious, hopeful in a way he didn't fully understand. Rebecca noticed and gently pulled her son closer, a reflex born from too many moments of having to protect what little she had left. Life had not always been this way for them. 2 years earlier, they had lived in a modest house on a quiet street outside Dayton. Rebecca's husband, Thomas, had worked in manufacturing, steady and dependable, the kind of man who believed that showing up every day was the same as loving his family. Then the factory closed. Then the savings thinned. Then the arguments grew heavier, each one landing with the unspoken fear of what came next. When Thomas left, it wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. He simply packed a bag one morning and said he needed to find himself somewhere else, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any fight. Rebecca tried. She worked 2 part-time jobs, cleaned offices at night, stocked shelves in the early mornings, all while trying to keep Lucas's world as normal as possible. But normal is expensive, and hope wears thin when rent is due. The eviction notice came folded neatly, almost politely, as if it were ashamed of what it was about to do to them. After that, there were couches, shelters, and finally a small transitional apartment that came with rules stricter than the winter outside. That night, they were traveling back from a church dinner, grateful for a warm meal, waiting for the bus that would take them back to a place that didn't quite feel like home. Andrew shifted his stance, glancing at his phone, irritated by the delay. He had been thinking about the holiday gala he had left early, about the speeches and applause, about the donation check he had written for a charity whose name he barely remembered. Generosity, to him, had always been neat and distant, something handled by assistants and accountants. It was safer that way. It didn't ask anything emotional of him. But then he noticed the boy. Lucas's lips were tinged blue, his chin trembling despite his effort to be brave. Andrew's eyes followed the child's gaze, and for the first time that evening, his focus shifted away from himself. There was a memory, buried deep, that stirred uncomfortably. A winter long ago, a bus stop in a different city, his own mother counting change with shaking hands, pretending everything was fine. He had spent years outrunning that version of his life, building walls of success thick enough to keep the past out. And yet here it was, standing a few feet away, looking at him with wide, unguarded eyes. Lucas finally spoke, his voice soft, almost apologetic, the kind of voice that doesn't expect an answer. He said the thing that had been living in him all evening, the thing that explained the empty feeling in his stomach better than hunger ever could. Santa missed our street. The words floated between them, fragile and honest, carrying with them an entire season of disappointment. Rebecca's breath caught, embarrassment and sadness washing over her at once. She placed her hand more firmly on Lucas's shoulder, wishing she could pull the sentence back into him, wishing she could give him a world where he didn't have to notice these things. Andrew felt something crack open in his chest, something he hadn't realized had hardened there. He didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, the city noise fading into the background as he looked at the boy and then at the woman beside him. He noticed the exhaustion in Rebecca's eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them, the way her posture spoke of constant calculation and quiet fear. He noticed the way Lucas tried to stand a little taller after speaking, as if bracing for disappointment. The bus lights appeared in the distance, slow and unimpressive, but Andrew barely saw them. His mind was racing, not with business problems or schedules, but with a question he hadn't asked himself in years. What kind of man had he become, and what kind of man did he want to be remembered as? The answer didn't come in words. It came in a decision, simple and terrifying in its simplicity. That night did not end with fireworks or miracles that erased hardship in an instant. It ended with choices, with Andrew insisting on small kindnesses that felt enormous to those receiving them. A warm meal at a diner that stayed open late. A ride offered without conditions. A hotel room paid for without explanations demanded. Rebecca resisted at first, pride and caution battling gratitude, but exhaustion eventually won. Lucas fell asleep in the booth, his head resting against his mother's arm, his breathing finally steady and warm. Over the weeks that followed, Andrew did not disappear back into his polished world as he might once have done. He checked in, quietly at first, then more intentionally. He helped Rebecca connect with job training programs, not as a savior, but as someone who understood how systems worked and how easily people fell through them. He arranged interviews, offered references, and most importantly, treated her like someone whose dignity mattered. For Lucas, he became a steady presence, not replacing a father, but offering something just as valuable: consistency. Rebecca found work with a small logistics company, her confidence growing with each passing month. Lucas returned to school full-time, his laughter slowly returning, his shoulders less hunched against the world. Andrew watched these changes with a humility that surprised him. He began to understand that generosity was not about grand gestures or public recognition, but about showing up again and again, even when it was inconvenient. On Christmas Eve the following year, snow fell softly over the same city streets. Rebecca and Lucas stood by the window of their small but permanent apartment, a modest tree glowing in the corner, its ornaments mismatched but treasured. There were no illusions of perfect happiness, no denial of how hard the journey had been, but there was warmth, real and earned. Andrew arrived quietly, carrying a simple gift and a presence that felt more like family than obligation. Lucas looked at him with a smile that held none of the fear of the year before, only gratitude and trust. In that moment, Andrew understood that the boy's words at the bus stop had not been an accusation, but an invitation to see, to care, to choose differently. Somewhere in the city, another bus stop stood under flickering lights. Another child waited. Another sentence formed silently in a small chest. The world had not changed overnight. Injustice and hardship still existed, stubborn and unfair. But one street had not been missed anymore, and one man had learned that kindness, once chosen, has a way of changing not just lives, but hearts. Before this story ends, take a moment to ask yourself, if you had been standing at that bus stop, what would you have done?